Hey y'all, this is Destiny checking in with today's Daily Diamond. Hey family, as always I would like to say welcome to anybody who is new and checking out my podcast. Happy Monday. We have officially hit the 3.6k downloads mark and I'm really excited. Make sure you guys are following me on Instagram so that you can enter in the 3k giveaway. Prizes include a $25 gift card, lashes from Royal Crown Extensions, as well as some glosses from Kisses by Shelly. Now, on to my sponsors before I jump into today's topic. So first, we have the only hair I wear, the Royal Crown Extensions. Make sure that you check Sade out for your bundles, your wigs, your bonnets, and your lashes and closures. It is amazing. Make sure you check her out. Her $8 lashes are in and available. They're mink lashes available for immediate pickup. And then, of course, we have the only lip gloss that I wear, Kisses by Shelly. Make sure you check Shelton out for your lip gloss and lash bundle deal. I'm really excited because I was able to make my first purchase after the KBC relaunch. So I'm really proud and happy to be supporting KBC. Then, of course, we have our up-and-coming braider, Lisha. Make sure you check her out for your box braids, your curls, your buns, and your ponytails. Make sure you let her know that Destiny sent you. And last but not least, we have my best friend, Tiana Nate. Make sure that you like, subscribe, share, and comment on all of her YouTube videos so that you can be entered in her $50 giveaway. As soon as she hits 100 subscribers, she will be giving away $50. So make sure you tune in. Make sure that if you shop with any and support any of the ladies, you let them know that Destiny sent you. Thank you for all of your support. Now, on to today's topic. This topic is dedicated to someone out there that I know. I'm not going to put the person out there, but it's dedicated to somebody. So I really want to talk about this concept of what works for one. So yesterday in my life, I encountered another situation and another instance in which I had a lesson that was learned. And the lesson that I learned from that is what works for you doesn't necessarily work for someone else. I know that we are in the stage and the season and the age of giving people advice. And my mom used to always tell me, like, everybody's advice, you don't necessarily need to take it, or take it with a grain of salt. And yesterday I realized how true that adage was, right? People are in a place or in a stage in their life in which they feel like they are necessarily able to give all of this advice. And it's cool to give advice. It's cool to get advice. Sometimes when you make decisions in life, if you've never dealt with something or you've never gone through something, right? You want to get the advice of someone who's dealt with the thing that you are dealing with and or who has overcome the thing that you are dealing with, right? Sometimes you want to get the advice. Sometimes, however, you don't want the advice. Sometimes the advice that they give is unwarranted. You didn't ask for it. You don't really need it, and nor do you care. And so I really want to talk about that today. What works for you does not necessarily work for someone else. And you have, even if you are giving advice, you have to understand that people are going to do their things, their lives, their choices, and they're going to make their decisions in a way that they think is best for them. And what works for them doesn't necessarily have to work for you. And that's okay. And that's the beauty of life. Just because I give my best friends advice, it doesn't mean that they're going to take it. Just because they give me advice, it doesn't mean that I'm going to take it. I may listen to them, I may acknowledge it, I may think about it, I may say, well, I would do this, or I would do that, or I would do this a little differently. Doesn't mean I don't necessarily acknowledge their advice. I don't necessarily acknowledge their skill set. They have a skill or they have an experience that I don't have. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I always need their advice. And so yesterday it was kind of brought to me and brought into my personal space. And so I figured this was the best time to talk about it. So it was kind of brought into my personal space, into my attention, that people believe, like, just because you live to be a certain age or live to do certain things, like, you're supposed to give all of this advice and you have all the advice in the world to give, and that people are supposed to listen to your advice. That's not necessarily true. Like, in all honesty, the only person's advice that I try to take wholeheartedly is probably my mom's. I take some work advice wholeheartedly from other educators because I haven't been doing this job that long. I do take some marriage advice from my best friend Therese, and I do take some parenting advice sometimes from some of my friends, but it doesn't always work. And just because I take advice sometimes, it doesn't mean that the advice that you give me is going to work for me. The advice that you give might work for you and be horrible for me. And I don't understand why we live in a world in which that's not okay. It is okay for people to have differences. It is okay for people to be different. It is okay for people to take your advice with a grain of salt. I remember when I was pregnant with my first child, and everybody wants to inundate you with all of this parenting advice, right? They want to tell you how to be a good parent. They want to tell you how to do this, or how you should do that, or how you should parent your child this way, or dress your child that way, or deal with your child this way. The way that I chose to deal with my son or my daughter is what worked for me. I do share my advice as a parent, but I don't take it any kind of way when my friends don't listen, because what works for me as a parent, what works for me as a parent is not necessarily going to work for anyone else. And so I'm really, really careful, and I'm really, really going to be more cognizant with giving my advice, because I realized after yesterday, like, my advice is not always warranted. And I'm not necessarily speaking about myself, but I'm saying that sometimes our advice is not always warranted. And when we give advice, you got to be careful, because you have to understand that just because you're giving advice, it doesn't make you an expert. You may not necessarily be a life coach. You may not necessarily be any of that. And it's funny because I'm doing this podcast, right? And I give life advice, but I never proclaim to be like a life coach. That's not what I do. I don't proclaim to be this master know-it-all, right? I always say, like, these are only my thoughts, and I only share my thoughts because they're therapeutic for me, and my hope is that they're therapeutic for from someone else. My hope is that they allow someone else, an opportunity to understand that they are not the only person that's out there that's struggling with this thing or that needs a little bit of motivation or needs a little bit of a pick-me-up, because the world that we live in is so hard, and the world that we live in is so difficult. And so even as a podcaster, right, I understand that I have to tread lightly. I also understand that not everything that I talk about, everybody is going to agree with, because the way that I live my life and the things that I choose to do for my life, my family, my job, do not necessarily fit anyone else. This is just my story, and I'm kind of sharing it, and I'm sticking to the story that I've kind of already written. And so when we're talking about our own experiences and we're talking about advice, be careful. Be careful when you give that advice, because you don't necessarily know what the person that you're giving that advice to, what they are going through, what they have been through, and you don't necessarily know if the advice that you give is going to do them any due justice. And don't feel like you are entitled to give that advice, because you're not. You are not perfect. You are not God. You don't get to cast the first and the last judgment. And so the advice that you give, it's good to give advice, but don't feel like people have to take your advice. Don't feel like you know it all, because you don't. Just because you've done certain things, you haven't experienced everything there is to experience in this thing called life. There are a lot of things that a lot of us don't experience, right? That's like somebody trying to give me parenting advice that's never been a parent. You could take that advice and you can put it, where the sun don't shine, because you've never done this here job. I don't like teaching advice from people that aren't teachers, because you don't do this here job. And so when you're giving advice, tread lightly. Understand that you don't necessarily know the person's story or the person's journey, and that your advice that worked for you is not necessarily the medicine and the antidote for someone else. And that's okay. Like, that's the beautiful part of life, that we're all different individuals. We all have different experiences, and what works for us and what's good for us and what's helpful to us and what's motivating to us is not necessarily the thing that is motivating to the other individual. And so for the people out there that are listening to this, and for the person out there that this episode is specifically geared toward, I have one piece of advice for you. I need you to stop giving so much advice, because you don't necessarily even know what you're talking about. And then the thing that you seem to keep talking about is so boring and so dead, nobody really cares anymore. And so you need to find another piece of advice to give, because that advice ain't living over here. And if my mom listens to this episode, she's gonna be cracking up, because she knows exactly what I'm talking about. And because I believe in saving face and I believe in being professional, I'm not gonna put particular individuals out there, but we need to be careful of advice. Stop giving parenting advice to people who don't want it. If people want it, they'll ask you for it. Stop giving life advice to people who don't want it. If they want it, they'll ask you for it. Stop thinking that what works for you is going to work for somebody else, and stop thinking that because I did my hair a certain way, it's going to be the same way for you. I don't care what gel you use. Just because you use Eco Styler, it don't mean it worked for me. And matter of fact, I hate freaking Eco Styler just to be goofy and make a point. So when you're giving advice, tread slightly, because what works for you doesn't necessarily work for everybody and the next individual. So today, when you focus on you and you think about you, think about that. Think about how your advice is good, maybe, and how in some instances, in some places, it's not so good. It don't always need to be said. It don't always need to be shared. And this is Destiny signing out with today's Daily Diamond. I'll see you guys tomorrow.